Hello. Right. Last week I talked about autism and ADHD, reasonable workplace adjustments, how employers have a legal obligation to consider and provide reasonable workplace adjustments for autism and ADHD and other neurodivergent conditions like dyslexia. There's a legal duty to provide equal access to employment opportunities, and neurodivergent conditions do fall under current disability legislation. So, why are only 16% of autistic adults in full time paid employment? Why do so many of us still burn out so early in our careers? I think it's two things. One, neurodivergent people mask and don't put our hands up when we're struggling. And two, there's a shockingly low understanding of co-occurring neurodivergent conditions to help build up and construct nuanced adjustments for an individual employee. There's emerging data now that the majority of neurodivergent people have more than one neurodivergent condition, yet they're still dealt with as if they're completely separate things that don't overlap with and crash into each other to create unique profiles for each individual. I want to focus this week on trying to think about ways of how we might start breaking that lack of understanding down so more of us can just contribute to the world in the ways we want to and in the ways that work for us. There's a lot to work through here to understand why this is so difficult, so please bear with me while I hack through the undergrowth a bit to try and start getting there. First off, there's a gulf between the entitlement to workplace adjustments and the actual implementation of workplace adjustments. Even well-meaning employers will find it exceptionally difficult to know what you want or need as a neurodivergent individual to perform at your best. I talked last week about how you, as the neurodivergent person in the workplace scenario, will ultimately have to be the one shaping the conversation if you want to get anywhere. I'm genuinely hopeful this situation will change and improve in the future, and there'll be a much greater understanding of different cognitive profiles and neurotypes. But the current reality, unless you have an exceptionally empathetic employer, you're going to have to put your head above the parapet and help your employer understand how to meet their legal obligations to support and get the best out of you. As much as you probably want and need a little TLC and hand-holding, particularly if you've recently hit a wall and had a major burnout, or recently realised you're neurodivergent after years in the dark, or both at once like I did, it's in all likelihood going to be you who'll have to handhold your employer through what your ideal world adjustments look like in practice. Look, no bones, this is a bad situation to be in, because you often come to these discussions with your HR at a big low point after you've had a big wobble, and in particular if you're a late diagnosed neurodivergent, you will likely have very little idea what specifically to ask for to create a better situation for yourself. I talked last week about broadly accepted reasonable workplace adjustments for A, autism, and B, ADHD. But right now, as of recording this in mid-2023, while there's been some progress around awareness and acceptance of autism and ADHD workplace adjustments, there's very little, if any, awareness and acceptance around co-occurring autism and ADHD, or AuDHD as it's been informally badged by the many people who are coming to the realization they have both of these neurodivergent sprinkles going on in their mixing bowl. Current estimates have it that anywhere between 30 to 70% of people who are on the autism spectrum also have significant ADHD traits. It's not quite as strong the other way around, so there's more people with just ADHD than just autism, if that makes sense. But think about those stats. It's quite feasibly more common to have both autism and ADHD than just autism alone. And guess what? That's even harder to spot and diagnose than just being on the autism spectrum, because the two conditions, as currently defined individually, can crash into each other and in some ways, at least externally, cancel the worst aspects of each other out, at least in terms of the classically recognised diagnostic criteria. Until relatively recently, it was impossible to be diagnosed with both. You were either one or the other. Now there's potentially more crossover than not. We're still right at the beginning of understanding this stuff. We really are. And there's shockingly almost no information or support out there on overcoming these challenges or helping this significantly large wedge of the population thrive in a workplace rather than just, at best, survive in it. Neurodivergence is one thing that affects 1 in 7 people, but it has multiple variants and facets, and the human race is still basically nowhere on understanding and normalising it. It's been massively under-researched historically, and we're only now starting to get marginally under the skin of it. It's bonkers. This is basic human existence 101. There are fundamentally 2 types of human brain, right? But that dominant 85% of human brains, neurotypicals, have dictated and dominated the way we communicate and interact and the way we set up workplaces and do business. And neurodivergent brains, very often of higher than average intelligence, let it not be forgotten, are often squeezed out of those workplaces. We could potentially do wonders in, because the working environments and practices don't work for us and cause overwhelm, and it just seems to be too much effort for the majority of the workforce to try and flex and make the way we do things work for everyone. And they wonder why autistic and ADHD people can sometimes seem so angry and chippy against the world. Adjustments. I'm not going to restate the recognised and broadly accepted reasonable workplace adjustments for autism and ADHD as individual conditions here. Please do watch last week's video for that. What I want to get into this week is how to even start to approach workplace adjustments if you've been diagnosed with or strongly suspect you have, both, because there is very little existing evidence or understanding about that out there. Even when you look at basic life approaches for AuDHD online, you get sweeping dismissive statements like, quote, treatment approaches for adults with AuDHD, parenthesis, autism and ADHD, can be challenging because these 2 conditions can interact with each other in complex ways. Yeah, no shit, Sherlock. And we saw last week when we looked at adjustments as siloed for one or the other, that while there's definitely a lot of overlap between the 2 conditions, they're also absolute polar opposites in a lot of ways. If that makes it challenging to treat and cope with, imagine how difficult it is to work out what a reasonable workplace adjustment is, to just not be living with 2 fighting chihuahuas in your brain for dominance 24/7. It's a constant struggle for dominance between those 2 conditions. There's that well-worn AuDHD meme that you might have seen if you've started searching around for AuDHD stuff with the 2 faces of Gollum. We loves our routines, but we hates them. And living with both autism and ADHD can feel like that. I got told off by a therapist for calling them my autism monster and my ADHD monster sitting on either shoulder, and how I can feel like I don't know which one's going to be more at my controls on any given day. But to me, that's genuinely how it feels a lot of days. Something I've been fine with at work one day, like speaking in front of colleagues or seniors, for example, when the chatty, visionary, idea-popping ADHD idea monster has been in full flow. But there will quite possibly be no way in hell I'll be able to do that the following day if the autism monster happens to be on top the next day and needs absolute silence and is grumpy and overwhelmed and is only capable of thinking about one thing. AuDHDers can have very unpredictable profiles. We can't predict ourselves, let alone prepare our colleagues for how we're going to be. And if we have the spoons, we can probably just about skirt by without having a meltdown. But if we don't, then good Lord, no one's having a good work day that day. And that's when we need understanding and empathy, support, and most of all, workplace adjustments for the unpredictable barriers we can face. AuDHD can and does present very differently than a standalone experience of either condition. While, yes, again, last week, autism and ADHD share a lot of overlapping symptoms, they also have very distinct characteristics that can manifest very differently in individuals with both. Let me break down 3 major areas of conflict within AuDHD. Number 1, attention and focus. In ADHD, your attention and focus challenges are mainly around inattentiveness, impulsivity, and or hyperactivity. If you're also autistic, you're going to have additional attention and focus challenges because of sensory overload, difficulties shifting or transitioning your attention from one thing to another, or being overly focused on specific things to the detriment of others. If you've got both, on a good day, you can get the range and breadth of your ADHD and the focus and depth of your autism tag teaming, and you can feel damn near unstoppable. On a bad day, though, all this championship winning tag team does is double your attention and focus challenges and make you next to useless. What's a reasonable adjustment for that? Leave me alone until I'm feeling it. It might take weeks of blankness and nothing, but one surprise day I'll come up with a completely new way of delivering your business that's better than anything you've ever heard. Is that a reasonable adjustment? I think it is. I doubt employers would. Number 2, social interactions. Autistic people are typically challenged in social interactions, generally have difficulties with social cues, reciprocal conversation, chit-chat, small talk, non-verbal communication, and can feel intensely awkward and isolated in group situations, so tend to be loners or have very small friendship groups. ADHDers also have communication challenges in social interactions, but it can be over-talking, impulsivity, interruptions, talking over people, impatiently finishing other people's sentences, poor impulse control, not listening, not taking turns. Either condition on their own can cause difficulties maintaining friendships and relationships, but they are very different, even diametrically opposing presentations, right? When you've got both autism and ADHD, your personality can come across as wildly unpredictable from one day to the next, making both friendships and work relationships even more challenging. Like, you were friendly yesterday, why are you aloof and weird today? Again, what's a reasonable adjustment for that? I genuinely don't think there is one, other than more awareness and a broader understanding that neurodivergent people, AuDHDers in particular, can act much less predictably than neurotypical people tend to. If you're struggling to get us, believe us, we are too. Adjustments, be kind, be patient, ask us how we're doing today. The third thing I'm highlighting is executive functioning. Both autism and ADHD can impact executive functioning, by which we mean abilities like planning, organising, and impulse control. ADHDers tend to struggle more with impulsivity, disorganisation, and time management. Autistic people tend to struggle more with flexible thinking, managing transitions, and problem solving. On a good day, if you've got both, your autistic systems will keep your speeding ADHD race car on the track and looking for all intents and purposes like you're nailing it, and even sometimes that you're more efficient and on top of things than your neurotypical colleagues. The person that your masking self wishes you could be every day, basically. On the bad days, though, you will feel like there is an invisible rope tight around your mind and body that leaves you unable to do anything at all without an absolutely Herculean effort. So, again, what's a reasonable adjustment for that? Again, I don't know. Again, be kind, be patient, understand that the good days, when they come, will more than outweigh the bad. Don't fire me if I have bad days. I'm sorry my bad days came when I had a deadline. How many undiagnosed AuDHDers have been suddenly felled by something they could do easily, previously, and how many undiagnosed AuDHDers have been yelled at by bosses or themselves just to pull themselves together, stop being lazy, just do the thing. What's a reasonable adjustment for those two chihuahuas fighting in our brains? Again, be kind, be patient. We'll get there when we get there, and we'll make a damn good job of it when we do, unless we get fired first. Please don't fire us. How, as a manager or employer, do you reconcile these contradictions in an AuDHD employee? Autism adjustments won't work in every situation, and ADHD adjustments won't work in every situation. How do you reconcile strong autistic need for autonomy with necessary ADHD needs for accountability? How do you yourself reconcile the strong autistic need for autonomy with the necessary ADHD need for accountability in a workplace setting and thrive rather than just survive? Like I've said, having both can in some ways cancel out the more noticeable excesses of either. It's why so many of us get missed. But the underlying challenges and frustrations of both are still 100% there and are often worse, even if they're less externally visible, because they contradict each other and cause us so much inner turmoil. It's why so many of us with both can feel caught in the middle of a neurodivergent tug of war. We likes routines, but we hates them. We likes predictability, but we need variety. We want silence and solitude and our way of doing things, but we crave conversation and the exchange of ideas. There were times before I knew I was neurodivergent that I felt like I had some sort of split personality. It's one of the reasons why realizing I'm just neurodivergent has been such a relief in knowing how to think of my brain. It's at least a starting point to work from. So, right to the crux of this. What might reasonable workplace adjustments look like for AuDHD? I'm going to have a broad stab at one generic list, like I did for each condition individually last time, with the caveat that it's bare bones basic. And then I'm going to throw out some ideas for building your own set of adjustments from that base. Although you're going to need to do the heavy lifting here and advocate for what you need, we tend to do well with a starting platform, right? So that's what this is an attempt at. And again, with a caveat that for now, because it's what I know, this is very white collar and office based. But reasonable adjustments for AuDHD might look something like: 1, provide employee with clear and structured expectations to understand their role and responsibilities and help them stay focused and on task. 2, a quiet and regulated work environment that limits overstimulating lighting, noise, or smells to help minimize distractions and stress. 3, flexible working hours. Flexible start and end times and the ability to work from home when needed to manage stress and fatigue, but the freedom to work from the office if we want. 4, regular check-ins, agreed, not ad hoc, with a supervisor or mentor to provide support, feedback, and structure. 5, regular breaks and, if needed, training and coaching on time management and prioritization to stay organized and keep on track. 6, access to checklists and flowchart templates or tech, if needed and if helpful, to help keep our thoughts organized and stay on track. And 7, assistive technology, if needed and if helpful, such as noise-cancelling headphones, text-to-speech software, or speech-to-text software to help with focus and communication. So look, that's a potential starting platform to start the juices flowing, but it's just a starting platform. Neurodivergence obviously affects individuals in a myriad of different ways, depending on which individual pizza toppings you have, your background, your culture, your underlying personality. Particular things I've experimented with and tested with management, and these don't even have to be pitched as adjustments per se, more just your ways of working preferences, have been asking to block out my mornings for focused thinking and only have meetings in the afternoon wherever possible, and to ask for a written summary of agreed actions if there's been a rapid-fire brainstorming session, for example, because machine gun verbal information can be hard for us to retain. The most important thing, and we touched on this last time, is to be open and honest about what the barriers are to you performing at your best and start a conversation. It's 100% in both your and your employer's interest to get the best out of you. Obviously, that's easier said than done. I didn't put my hand up and say, I'm struggling with X, Y, and Z for almost 2 decades of my working life. Because when you've grown up undiagnosed neurodivergent, and again, I'm trying not to generalize too much because, yes, everyone is different, but I imagine your self-esteem is probably garbage, and you probably think in almost every way that you're simply not good enough. And you can't unpick that in a 30-minute conversation with your boss. All you can do is start a two-way conversation and refine it over time. Listening is key, and for them to listen, you need to be open and vulnerable about this stuff. Normalize transparent conversations and open, honest discussions about challenges, ways of working, and mental health. Everyone's got something going on, and the more people normalize talking about this stuff, the more normal and part of everyday discussions it becomes for everyone. Everyone belongs in the workforce if they want to be, and everyone brings strengths to the table to make a team work. I know I've gone along with this already, but there's a couple of things in closing that I briefly want to share as potential tools to start thinking about what you can use to start those bespoke conversations. I'm an absolute heathen with understanding iMovie and how to share my screen properly. Maybe I can edit this in future, but for now I'm just going to have to talk through it and pop a link in the video description if you want to take a look at the documents and templates I'm about to talk about. I really wish I was better at techie video editing stuff, but I'm just not, and I can't make myself. Sorry, but the first template I want to mention and share the link for in the description box for starting those conversations is called a user manual for me, and it's a really simple 1-page 8-box template. It's a blogger called Cassie Robinson who did it and shared her own version back in 2017 and included blank templates for people to fill in and share and use themselves. And within each of the 8 boxes, you can include 3 to 4 bullet points each. The 8 boxes are conditions I like to work in, the time or hours I like to work, the best ways to communicate with me, the ways I like to receive feedback, things I need, things I struggle with, things I love, and other things to know about me. I'm a massive fan of this. We did it in one of my old work teams, and everyone, well, the people in the team who actually used it and engaged with it, immediately felt like they got each other better. A former boss of mine, really nice guy, Alan Sparks, introduced me to this. So the user manual for me can be a really useful part 1 of the working together constructively conversation. Part 2 of that conversation focuses exclusively on the things I struggle with box. And this leads directly to what's increasingly known as a workplace adjustments passport. More and more places of employment are embracing the concept of a workplace adjustments passport. And again, I'll put a link in the description text with more information about that. The workplace adjustment passport drills down deeper into those things you struggle with and helps distill the essence of what you might need as a reasonable adjustment to help you perform at your best. Again, this is 8 sections, at least the one the UK Civil Service uses as standard, and it's pitched as guided questions for the employee to answer. And they are, 1, what are the details of your disability or workplace barriers that you currently experience? 2, do you require any adjustments to your workplace to support you? 3, do you require any adjustments to your working hours to support you? 4, do you have preferred methods of communication that may support you or any methods of communication you may find challenging? 5, do you require any specialist equipment or technology to be provided to support you in your role? 6, additional information that may not have been covered in the sections above. 7, summary of agreed workplace adjustments. And 8, a checklist table for regularly agreed review and discussion between employer and employee of how well your adjustments are being implemented. The best thing about the adjustment passport, as applied in the UK Civil Service, again, mileage may vary with other employers, but you do not need to have a formal diagnosis for anything to agree a workplace adjustments passport in principle with your manager. An employer doesn't need to know why you need an adjustment. It's up to you whether you choose to disclose a diagnosis or not. But If you ask your employer for a reasonable adjustment or a range of reasonable adjustments to help you perform your job better, they just have to consider whether those proposals are reasonable or not. And there's 5 questions they consider in determining if a proposed adjustment is reasonable or not. Will the adjustment solve the problem? How practical is it? What is the potential disruption? Are there health or safety risks? And what is the cost? If all of those considerations seem reasonable, then boom, you make an adjustment to help get the best out of the employee. Applied logically and compassionately, it really isn't rocket science. Reasonable adjustments are defined as changes an employer can make to remove or reduce a disadvantage. For example, making changes to the workplace, changing someone's working arrangements, or finding a different way to do something. Finding a different way to do something is key for neurodivergent brains. The British Business Disability Forum estimate that 90% of disabilities are invisible, and neurodivergence obviously falls under that invisible disability catch-all. We often don't ask for adjustments because we feel like our condition either isn't a disability, and again there's a whole other video to be had on that, or that our condition isn't bad enough to cause a fuss over and put our heads above the parapet, so we just keep suffering in silence and burn out and die earlier. But at heart, this might not be as much of an uphill struggle as it seems. We just need to talk more. Write your user manual for me. Encourage people you work with to do theirs. Using the adjustment examples we talked about in this or last week's video as a foundation to build from, if helpful, think of things you struggle with as a unique individual in the workplace and start to think of reasonable differences that would simply make your work life better. Then write those ideal world differences down in a workplace adjustments passport. Then test your thinking with a friend or colleague to see whether they think what you're asking for is reasonable. Then talk to your management about it. In an ideal world, these things don't have to be a battle, just a conversation. We may not be in that ideal world yet, but starting a conversation will start to help us get there. Alright, that's me. Long one. No real answers or one-size-fits-all solutions on what reasonable adjustments for AuDHD look like, because these two conditions interact with each other in complex ways. Just some ideas about how to start building your own bear to thrive, not survive. But I hope some useful nuggets in amongst all that to mull over that might help conversations for all of us going forward. Yeah, cheers. Thanks for watching these, whether you're neurodivergent or otherwise, and see you next Sunday. Bye.